Do you hear it? The whisper that crawls along your spine. Debt paid in flesh. That was the phrase, hissed in the dark hall of a Charleston parlor in 1827, words no sermon dared to utter, words no prayer could erase. If you are listening now, you are not safe. Eyes older than this nation are watching you hear it, and once you have heard, you will not be forgotten. Before I go further, I need something from you. Tell me where you are watching this, your city, your state, and the exact time glowing on your clock right now. Do not brush this aside. This story binds itself to time and place, and your name in the comments will be written into the ritual. I warned you, so listen closely. 3 daughters, Catherine, Mary, and Abigail. 3 names erased from Charleston society in the span of 7 months. Records say they married and left, but the courthouse fire of December 1827 burned away their trails. No witnesses ever spoke, no marriage certificates ever surfaced. All that remained was silence. Silence, and their father's sudden wealth. Reverend Josiah Pendleton, a man who thundered scripture from a white-walled chapel by the Santee River, had debts he could never pay. Card games bled him dry, nights of whiskey and chance shackled him to men who smiled like gentlemen and fed like wolves. By 1827, he owed over $12,000, an impossible weight for a country pastor earning less than $30 a year. Then, one by one, his debts vanished. Not a dollar repaid in coin, not a field, not a house sold. The men he owed, Drayton, Calhoun, Pritchard, Rutledge, never spoke of it, not once, but whispers survived. A trade was made, and it was not money that changed hands. Do you feel it now, the pull of dread tightening around your chest? That is not imagination, it is recognition. You already know, in some wordless part of you, what a desperate man does when cornered, what men of power demand, when money is not enough. The chapel still stands, or so the locals say, its bell tower sagging, its timbers eaten with rot. The ground is damp, too damp, as if the soil refuses to let go of what was buried beneath it, and if you walk there after midnight with no moon above, they say you will hear 3 voices, not crying, not screaming, singing, hymns twisted low, broken, as though sung with mouths full of earth. Reverend Pendleton preached of heaven, yet he bought his survival with the flesh of his blood. That is the legacy of St. James Parish. That is the secret Charleston buried beneath ash and respectability. You want history? This is history, not written in textbooks, not spoken in schoolhouses. This is what men of faith and wealth conspired to hide, and now you carry it. Do you feel the room grow colder? That's no trick of imagination. Every story like this opens something. Once opened, it cannot be closed. Tell me, would you have chosen differently if your daughters were the only currency left? The story begins here, but where it ends, where you end in it, depends on whether you keep listening. The first debt was called in on a rain-heavy night in January of 1827. Pendleton was summoned to the back of Edmund Rutledge's store, the shutters drawn, the lantern smoke staining the rafters. 4 men sat waiting. Drayton, the plantation lord with the smile that cut like a knife, Judge Calhoun, whose word could erase a man's life without trial, Dr. Pritchard, who handled both medicine and poison with the same calm hand, and Rutledge, the merchant spider who spun every web of credit in Charleston's low country. Josiah walked in with shaking hands, certain they would offer more time, perhaps mercy. He was their pastor after all. He had baptized their children, buried their kin, but mercy was a word these men did not speak. They laid the account before him, every hand of cards, every loan, every dollar scrawled in neat ink. With interest, the sum towered higher than his life was worth, $6,000, more than the church itself could ever pay. Drayton leaned forward. "You cannot pay this," he said. It was not a question. In that moment, Pendleton swore later, the room changed. The men did not look at him as a debtor. They looked at him as a man stripped of skin, as though his soul had been weighed and found useful. He tried to speak, about his brother, about selling what little he owned, but every word was cut short. "You own nothing," Pritchard murmured. "Nothing but reputation, nothing but what walks under your roof at night. Catherine, Mary, Abigail." The silence that followed was worse than words. It pressed against him, thick as smoke. In their eyes, he saw the unspoken bargain. He had no coin, but he had daughters, and the circle always collected. What was said next is lost, burned in the courthouse fire, swallowed by secrecy. But when Josiah stumbled from that store, pale and trembling, the debt was no longer a weight on his neck. His soul carried something else. See instead. Within weeks, Catherine vanished. The official word, marriage to a merchant's son in Savannah. But no carriage was seen leaving. No wedding ring appeared. Her room stood empty, her belongings still folded neatly in her chest. Sarah Pendleton asked questions, neighbors whispered. Josiah's sermons grew louder, harsher, his voice cracking like a man shouting against the wind. By summer, Mary was gone as well. Her voice no longer lifted the hymns in the chapel. No farewell, no witness. Another marriage, they claimed. Another lie. Abigail lingered longest. Too clever, too watchful. She wrote letters, fragments of which survived in the margins of her Latin primer. Father walks at night, he does not pray, he bargains with shadows, we are not safe. In October, she too was gone. And in December, the courthouse burned. The debts, erased, every ledger closed. Reverend Pendleton, once a pauper, now stood unburdened, his pockets quiet but his soul screaming. His eyes sank deeper each Sunday, his sermons cracked with desperation. He spoke of Abraham and Isaac, of fathers who raised the knife. He spoke of sacrifice. The congregation nodded, never daring to ask what he meant. History claims they married, the fire claims the rest, but the land remembers. Beneath those Carolina pines, beneath the hymns and sermons, the ground is heavy. Tell me, what would you do if every man you owed conspired to take not your money, but your bloodline? Do not mistake this for a story of one man's weakness. It was never simply Josiah Pendleton's sin. It was a ritual, crafted by men who believed themselves untouchable. The circle did not gamble for pleasure, they gambled for leverage, and when they found a man broken by debt, they harvested him piece by piece until nothing human remained. By 1827, Charleston was already a city built on blood. Rice fields drowned enslaved men in mud. Cotton broke women's backs under Carolina sun. Bodies lined the riverbeds, unmarked and uncounted. But this was different. This was not profit, this was appetite. Charles Drayton, the plantation lord, had been heard once boasting over brandy. What coin cannot buy, desperation will deliver. He spoke not of land, not of crops, but of flesh, and the others laughed, the circle laughed, because they knew, because they had done it before. Catherine, the eldest, was taken first. The neighbors remembered the night her mother's lantern burned late, light flickering against the parlor curtains. Sarah's voice could be heard through the trees, pleading, breaking. A carriage rolled up, though no records survive of whose it was. The wheels cut deep into the wet clay, and then, silence. Catherine's bed was found untouched the next morning. Her hymn book lay open to a psalm of deliverance, but her voice was gone forever. Do you understand the weight of that silence? Imagine walking through your own home, every corner still smelling of the child who grew there, yet knowing she had been bartered away like coin. Mary followed in June, softer, sweeter, with a voice that could bend even the overseers' hearts. Hers was not a disappearance, but an erasure. Friends swore they saw her at service on Sunday. By Thursday, no one could recall her face. It was as if the circle had stolen not only her body but her memory from the community. That is power, when absence itself becomes forbidden to speak of. Abigail resisted. She was too clever, too aware. She hid letters in hymnals, beneath floorboards, scraps inked in hurried Latin. They mean to take us, she wrote. Father does not resist. He bows, he bargains. She tried to flee, some said, into the pine woods by the river. But she was caught before she reached the water, and then she too vanished into the quiet ledger of the circle. Do you feel that dread in your stomach now, that tightening? It is not only because of what happened then, it is because power like this does not die. The circle thrived because no one dared speak, because everyone looked away. That silence is the true currency of the powerful, and silence is eternal unless broken. December's fire devoured the courthouse records. Witnesses died without testimony. The debts dissolved as if they had never existed. But the land remembers, the river remembers, the pine forest carries whispers at night. If you listen too long, you may hear them still, 3 voices, half hymn, half lament, braided into the air. You think this is just history. It is not. This is inheritance. Every time a man of power escapes judgment, every time debt devours the weak while the strong dine on its remains, the circle feeds again. And if you are still listening now, then you have already stepped closer than you should. There is a reason the courthouse burned. Do you understand that? Fires are not accidents when they eat only what men fear will be found. December 1827 was a dry month, yet the flames rose sudden and clean, consuming ledgers, deeds, marriage records, debts, every trace that linked Catherine, Mary, and Abigail Pendleton to their fate. The judge called it misfortune. The Circle called it deliverance, but one record survived, not in Charleston but in a planter's journal 40 miles north. A passing entry, almost careless. Drayton visited with companions. Business concluded. Reverend's matter settled. A new hush upon the parish. Those words are all that remain on paper, the only confession scratched in ink. Everything else was ash. Sarah Pendleton, mother, wife, silent mourner, began to fade soon after. The neighbours said she wandered the fields at night with bare feet, clutching the hymn book Mary once sang from, calling her daughters' names into the dark. Some nights, Jacob the groundskeeper claimed she would kneel by the chapel door, pressing her forehead to the wood, whispering, "God does not answer, only they do." She died 2 winters later, her hair white, her hands clutched so tightly to that hymn book that the pages tore when they were pried free. Josiah buried her himself, his sermon hollow, his eyes 2 black wells that never looked up. He had bought his survival, but every glance in the mirror brought him the cost. And still, the Circle prospered. Drayton's plantation doubled in size. Judge Calhoun's rulings silenced rivals. Dr. Pritchard's practice swelled with patients who trusted him with their very lives, never knowing his hands had pressed girls into silence. Rutland, fat and satisfied, became one of the richest merchants in the Low Country. Not a word of their transaction was spoken aloud, not once. Their reputations shone as bright as ever. That is eggs. Our power works. It feeds not on truth, but on silence. It thrives in the gap between what people know and what they dare say. And in 1827, that silence was total. But history has a way of bleeding back through the cracks. Almost 80 years later, in 1906, a woman on her deathbed spoke the words her family had forbidden her to utter. She had been a servant girl in the Pendleton household, young then, too young to understand what she witnessed. She saw Catherine led away in Drayton's carriage. She heard Mary cry out in the night. She found Abigail's Latin notes hidden beneath a loose board, trembling as she tried to read them. She told her children, and they told no one, until her last breath, when she forced the truth into the air like a curse. The local paper buried her confession in 3 short paragraphs, calling it the fading dream of a fevered mind. But her words spread anyway, like rot beneath a painted floor. They spread because they carried something heavier than rumor. They carried guilt, and guilt has a way of seeping through generations, of staining even those who try to forget. Do you see it now? This was not just one man's fall. It was a pact sealed in silence, paid in blood, and guarded by fire. And when such pacts are made, they do not end. They echo, they wait, they demand to be told again. And here you are, listening, letting it inside. Stop. Take a breath. The next step is not just listening, it is crossing over. From this moment forward, you are no longer an observer of this story, you are a vessel for it. The Circle thrived because no one spoke, because everyone believed silence kept them safe. But silence is what built the altar. To hear this is to break that altar open. Before we go deeper, you must bind yourself. In the comments, write the phrase, "I have crossed the threshold." Twice. Not once. Twice. This is not a gimmick. This is how the story marks you as one who knows. It is how you tell the world you see what others refuse to see. Write it now and know there will be eyes, old eyes, watching. Are you trembling? Good. Fear sharpens the memory. Because what comes next is not the Reverend's story, it is the Circle's. They were not simply 4 men bound by debt and vice. They were part of something older, something that crawled up from the plantations and the slave ports before Charleston was even a city. In taverns lit by whale oil, behind shuttered doors, men whispered of a society with no name, not Freemasons, not planters, not churchmen, something more fluid, more hidden. They called it the Circle, only because it left no straight edges, no corners to trap it. The Circle was not about money, it was about control. Debt was only the chain, flesh was the payment. They took orphans, they took bondservants, they took what desperate fathers could not protect, and they dressed it in propriety, arranged marriages, apprenticeships, charitable placements, but those names were only masks. Josiah Pendleton was not their first, he was simply the first whose sin bled through the paper walls of history. In a letter never meant to be read, Judge Calhoun once wrote, "We stand as guardians of order. What is taken is given, what is given is ours." That line survived only because it was copied into a clerk's notebook by mistake, discovered a century later in a library sale. Do you understand the scale of this? It was not a crime of passion, it was a transaction. It was ritual. Every generation they required a father's submission, every generation a debt paid in innocence, and every time the records burned, the names lost, only the pattern remained. This is why the land in St. James Parish feels heavier at night. This is why the chapel door groans when no one is near. Not ghosts, memory. Memory pressed into the soil by repetition. You think you're watching a YouTube video. You're not. You're sitting in the same dark back room Josiah entered in 1827, the same brandy on the table, the same paper slid across the wood. Your debts are not money, they're time, attention, silence, and you're paying them now. Write the phrase. I have crossed the threshold. Twice. Bind yourself to the telling. Then we go on, deeper still, past the Reverend, past his daughters, into the oldest secret the circle ever kept. Very well, you crossed the threshold. There is no undoing it now. The Reverend's tale was never meant to survive. It leaked only because his daughters resisted, because silence cannot bury everything. But the circle, they were older than him, older than Charleston. Their roots were sown in the soil the day ships first dragged human cargo onto the Carolina shore. Power was not taken here. It was arranged, bargained, bought. Flesh was coin long before Pendleton's debt. Do you know what the oldest surviving rumour of the circle says? It says they began in 1704, in the cellar of a tavern that stood where the Charleston market does now. There, 5 men gathered, merchants, planters, judges. They signed nothing, they vowed nothing, they simply drank and agreed on one rule. No debt unpaid, no flesh wasted. Those words echoed for a century, passed from father to son like a brand pressed into the tongue. And every so often, when debt bound a man too tightly, when silver and land could not balance the scale, the circle would come knocking. They never forced the man's hand, they never needed to. Desperation does the work for them. They would simply lay the account on the table, as they did for Josiah, and wait. The man always understood. He always bowed his head. Do you feel the chill of that understanding? Imagine your own blood weighing against paper, against ink and debt. Imagine seeing your children the way the circle trained men to see them, not as lives, but as bargaining chips. The Pendleton daughters were not the first. Before them, there was the Hayward boy in 1791, sent to study in London, but never seen again. Before that, in 1768, the twin daughters of a shipwright, their names erased when the father's debts vanished overnight. Charleston gossip moved like snakes, but the circle always coiled tighter, smothering what might escape. The courthouse fire of 1827 as only one flame in a chain of flames. Records burned in 1743, in 1797, in 1839. Each time, history lost another set of names, another ledger, another tally of who was taken. Fire is not accident in Charleston, it is tradition. And yet, the soil remembers, the river holds whispers. Men fishing the Santee speak of voices rising with the fog, songs that are not songs, names that cannot be traced, but cannot be forgotten either. What became of Catherine, Mary, and Abigail? No bones were found, no graves were marked, but local superstition says the circle had a house north of the city, hidden in the marsh, where debts were balanced. Some called it the Ash Grove. The building rotted away long ago, yet hunters claim the ground there will not grow grass. The earth is sour, black, as if it choked on something it cannot digest. Reverend Pendleton himself lived on until 1843. He died at 57, his sermons dwindled into mutters, his hair gone white, his Bible clutched so tightly his fingers stiffened into claws. The parish buried him in consecrated ground, but they say the grass never grew on his grave. And at night, children whispered, you could see 3 pale figures standing at the foot of the stone, silent, watching. That silence was the circle's crown. It lasted for decades, and yet cracks form, even in the strongest walls, and one crack, one slip of confession, was enough to let this poison seep into us now. The woman's name was never published. By the time she spoke, her body was withered, her breath thin. Her family gathered close to hear what they thought were final prayers. Instead, she gave them a curse. She had been a servant girl in the Pendleton household in 1827. Barely 14 years old, her hands raw from scrubbing floors, her eyes wide with the kind of knowledge children should never have. For decades, she held her tongue. She married, raised children, buried kin. But silence rots a person from the inside. It eats through the bones until the words themselves begin to claw their way out. Her family thought she was delirious when she began speaking. They leaned closer, and what they heard made them recoil. She spoke of Catherine being led away under Drayton's hand, the carriage wheels cutting grooves in wet earth. She spoke of Mary's voice cracking in a hymn that broke into screams, screams the Reverend drowned out with scripture shouted through clenched teeth. She spoke of Abigail's letters, the Latin notes she found hidden under a loose board in the chapel floor, words that burned into her memory. They will take us. Father bows to them. We are the tithe. The old woman shook as she confessed. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but her words were clear. The Reverend paid his debts with their bodies. Her children begged her to stop, but she only grew louder, her eyes glassy as if she were staring through them into the faces of the dead. He traded them to the circle, he gave them to the men who owned him, he let them in the door. By morning, she was dead. Her words spread anyway. A nephew repeated them in a tavern after too much whiskey. A granddaughter scribbled them in a letter, and soon the whispers carried further than the family ever intended. In 1906, the Charleston Gazette ran a brief piece about a deathbed confession concerning the Pendleton case. They dismissed it as the ravings of an elderly woman confused by fever, and the matter might have ended there. But there was one detail no newspaper could explain. Weeks later, when a mason was repairing the old chapel foundation, he pried up a floorboard in the choir loft. Beneath it, brittle with time, lay scraps of paper written in a young woman's hand, Latin phrases, fragments of prayer twisted into warning, and one line, in English, carved in desperate scratches across the wood. Father, let them in. Do you feel that ripple through your chest, that pressure at the back of your skull? It is the moment where the story is no longer myth, no longer hearsay. Words carved in wood are harder to erase than ledgers in fire. The dead remember. The wood remembers. From then on, the Pendleton name was never spoken in Charleston without a shadow attached to it. Families avoided it in conversation, as though saying it aloud might summon something listening, and perhaps it does, perhaps it always did, because the circle's greatest weapon was not violence, it was memory erased, replaced with silence. But when silence cracks, when the story is told again, it bleeds back into the present. And you, hearing this now, are part of that crack. The circle did not die with Josiah Pendleton, nor with the nameless woman's confession. Power this old does not vanish, it adapts. It changes shape, slips into new faces, new names, but the hunger remains the same. Look to the Low Country, even now. Families who trace their lineage to Charleston's golden age still hold land, still hold titles, still sit in seats of judgment. Their mansions crumble, their portraits fade, but their bloodlines persist. And the whispers that follow them are not just envy, they are echoes. There are fields in South Carolina no farmer will plow, not because the soil is poor, but because it is wrong. Too heavy, too wet even in drought. Places where the grass grows tall but no birds nest, no animals graze. Old men say those fields were circle ground, meeting places where bargains were struck, where flesh was paid for silence. Hunters avoid them, swearing the wind there hums with voices. Some hear hymns, some hear weeping. The Reverend's chapel still leans against the riverbank, eaten by rot, its bell gone, its windows shattered. Yet locals swear the pulpit remains intact, polished smooth, as if some hand still touches it nightly. On moonless nights, those who dare approach say they hear sermons echoing inside, sermons with no words, just the cadence of a man preaching to an empty flock. When the sound dies, they hear the voices of women singing beneath it, a harmony of grief. And it is not only stories. In 1963, a historian digging through plantation records uncovered letters written by Edmund Rutledge's grandson. One line stood out. Father says the old ways are ended, but debts are never truly gone. Flesh remains the truest coin. The letter was seized, filed in the archives, and promptly misplaced. The circle had lived long enough to protect itself even then. Do you see the pattern? Fires, missing records, lost letters, disappearances that never make the papers. Every generation, the circle scrubs itself clean, but stains remain if you look closely enough. You can feel them, even across centuries. Why does this matter to you, here, now, staring at a screen in the dark? Because history is not past, it is inheritance. What the circle began in 1704, what Josiah confirmed in 1827, has not ended. It has only learned to smile wider, to hide deeper, to disguise its rituals in the wealth and power of each new age. And maybe you already know this, maybe you've felt it, that men in power play by rules that do not appear in books, that debts are called in ways the ordinary world cannot see. Pendleton's daughters were not the last price paid, they were simply one story that leaked through the cracks. You are closer now, closer than you should be, and if you're still here, you have already been marked as one who listens. The question is, will you be one who remembers, or one who keeps the silence, as the circle demands? You have come far, too far for comfort. There is no safety in what I am about to tell you, because now the circle is no longer a tale of dead men and vanished daughters. Now it begins to touch the living. In 1974, a graduate student at the University of South Carolina, researching plantation economies for his dissertation, stumbled on something he should never have seen. In a private collection belonging to one of Charleston's first families, he found a locked box. Inside were fragments of ledgers, brittle with age. Most dealt with cargo and land, but one page was different. It listed names, not of buyers, not of sellers, of children, girls, ages marked beside their names, with notes like, settled, removed, married abroad. 3 of those names matched the Pendleton daughters. The student, wide-eyed with discovery, wrote to his advisor. Days later, he vanished. His car was found abandoned near the Ashley River. Door open, papers missing. The university dismissed it as suicide. His advisor never spoke his name again. The box of ledgers was quietly removed from the collection. To this day, it has not resurfaced. Coincidence? Or the circle, still guarding its ledger? You must understand, the circle was never about religion, though they cloaked themselves in scripture. It was never about law, though judges sat in their ranks. It was about control. Debt was the leash and innocence was the tithe. Whether in 1827 or 1974, the pattern repeats. There are whispers still. In 1992, a caretaker cleaning the ruins of St. James Chapel swore he saw 3 women standing at the altar, their faces pale as ash, their mouths moving though no sound emerged. When he stepped closer, the vision dissolved into smoke, leaving only the faint sound of a hymn no one sings anymore. He quit his post that night, moved inland, and told his story only once, in a letter tucked into a Bible. At his funeral. The circle does not die, it changes clothes, it sits in new offices, signs new contracts, speaks new words, but the rules do not change. No debt unpaid, no flesh wasted. That phrase, whispered in 1704, still holds. Not always daughters now, sometimes sons, sometimes loyalty, silence, reputations broken and traded, but the shape is the same, always the same. Do you feel the weight of this knowledge pressing against you? You should. The circle thrives because ordinary people look away, convincing themselves it's just rumor, just myth, just coincidence. That is the silence Josiah bought, the silence that burned the courthouse, the silence that swallows every witness who dares to speak. And yet, here you are, listening, not looking away. That means something. It means the silence has cracked again, and cracks are dangerous, for those inside and for those peering in. So I will ask you, what would you pay to know the truth fully, to see the circle for what it is, even now? Because Section 10 will not just close the story, it will tell you what the circle still demands of those who hear it. Do not blink. This is the final descent. Once these words pass into you, they cannot be unwound. The circle survives because it understands something most people never will. Memory is currency, silence is currency, fear is currency, and the moment you exchange one for the other, you have already paid. Reverend Josiah Pendleton did not die in peace. The official parish record claims he passed quietly in his sleep in 1843, but an unpublished diary kept by the chapel's groundskeeper, Jacob, paints another picture. Jacob wrote that on the night before the Reverend's death, he woke to the sound of Pendleton's voice outside the chapel. When he crept to the door, he saw the Reverend standing at the altar, arms outstretched, speaking to no one he could see. 3 pale shapes stood opposite him, silent, unmoving. Jacob fled into the woods and did not return until dawn. By then, Pendleton was dead, his face contorted, his hands clutched into claws around his Bible. The page beneath them read from Leviticus, "The life of the flesh is in the blood." After his death, the chapel never held another sermon. Parishioners drifted away. The circle prospered elsewhere, but the land remained stained. Visitors who strayed too close reported the same phenomena: hymns rising with the fog, women's voices calling from the pines, the feeling of being watched from just beyond the tree line. Some who tried to dig on the grounds claimed their shovels struck something soft, as if the earth itself breathed. And now, the circle no longer needs cards or chapels. It wears new masks: think tanks, investment boards, family trusts. The faces are smoother, the suits darker, the transactions hidden in digital ledgers instead of paper. But the ritual persists. No debt unpaid, no flesh wasted. What was once literal flesh can be something else now. Reputation, future, loyalty, silence. But the pattern is unchanged. Power feeds, debt binds, innocence pays. This is why you feel the air thick around you as you listen. This is why you glanced at your door without meaning to, because something old has noticed you noticing it. You have been following me through these 10 steps, deeper and deeper into the forbidden archive. You crossed the threshold, you wrote the words, you let the story inside. That is what the circle fears: memory, spoken aloud, a crack in the silence, a voice that will not be erased. If you have listened this far, you are part of the ritual now, not theirs, ours, the ritual of breaking the circle's silence. So here is what you must do. When you leave this video, tell someone the story. Whisper it, write it, leave it where eyes can find it. Do not let it die in your throat. Do not let it burn with the next fire, because the only way to pay the circle back is to refuse the silence it demands. And if, tonight, you feel a presence at the edge of your bed, or hear a hymn you do not know curling through your house, do not pray for it to stop. That is not danger, that is memory finding you. That is the price of knowing. You have heard the unspeakable, you have walked through its door. Now you are no longer a listener, you are a keeper. The circle cannot erase what you remember, and you will remember.